The Arctic wind was brutal that morning, cutting through every layer of protection the team had. Dr. Robert Hayes stood outside the drilling station, watching the massive equipment punch through the ice like it was nothing. His hands were freezing even inside the thick gloves, but he couldn't look away. Something about today felt different. Something about today felt important. Robert had been studying Arctic ice for 20 years. He knew every crack, every pattern, every strange thing that hid beneath the frozen surface. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what was about to happen. The drill was supposed to collect ice samples for their climate research project. That was it. Simple. Routine. Just another day in the field, just another set of data to bring back to the lab. Then the equipment started beeping. Not the normal beeping. A different sound. A warning sound. "Hey Rob. We got something down here," his assistant called from inside the drilling tent. Robert rushed in, snow falling from his jacket onto the warm floor. The screen was flashing red. The drill had hit something solid. Something that wasn't ice. At 300 meters deep, the drill had struck metal. Robert's heart started racing. Metal didn't belong down there. Ice formations, rocks, maybe some trapped air pockets. Those were normal. But metal? That made no sense. His mind was already running through possibilities. Maybe it was some old military equipment from decades ago. Maybe it was debris from a plane that had crashed years back. Maybe it was something they'd find an ordinary explanation for by dinner time. But he didn't think so. The team worked carefully over the next few hours, using gentler equipment to excavate around the metallic object. They had to be slow, had to be precise. Breaking whatever this was might destroy crucial information. Robert stood in the freezing cold, watching the ice fall away piece by piece, revealing something underneath. It was massive. As the ice melted and broke apart, the true size of the object became clear. It wasn't small debris. It was huge. And it was shaped like nothing Robert had ever seen before. The surface was smooth, almost glowing with a faint crystalline sheen. The color was strange too, something between silver and blue like frozen moonlight. And then he saw the markings. Symbols covered the entire visible surface. They weren't random scratches or wear marks. These were deliberate. Carved or etched with precision. Robert's hands were shaking as he moved closer. The symbols formed patterns almost like writing, but nothing like any language he'd ever encountered. Not English. Not any language he recognized. This wasn't Russian or Chinese or any alphabet he knew. His first instinct was to call someone. Call the university. Call the government. Call everybody. But Robert forced himself to stay calm. He documented everything with photographs. He measured the exposed section. He took samples of the surrounding ice. All the while, his mind was screaming that this was impossible. The spacecraft, and that's what it had to be though he barely let himself think the word, was perfectly preserved. The ice had kept it safe, locked away for thousands of years. The hull showed no signs of damage, no cracks, no corrosion. It was like someone had parked it here and walked away yesterday, and then the world had frozen it in place. Robert's phone was in his hand before he consciously decided to use it. He called Marcus, the project director, back at headquarters. He kept his voice steady, kept it professional. "We found something unusual. You need to see this." Within an hour, news had spread. Within 2 hours, military helicopters were appearing on the horizon. Within 3 hours, government officials were flying in from the capital. Robert watched it all happen like someone watching a movie. The discovery was getting bigger than any of them could control. Standing there in the Arctic cold, watching the sun hang low on the horizon, Robert understood that the world had just changed. Everything they thought they knew about human history, about where people came from, about their place in the universe, all of it was about to be questioned. The spacecraft sat beneath them, its symbols catching the last light of day. It had been waiting here for thousands of years. Waiting for someone to find it. Waiting for this exact moment. And now that moment had arrived, there was no going back. Dr. Linda Peterson had never been more nervous in her entire life. She stood outside the entrance to the spacecraft, wearing a full protective suit, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it through the helmet. The government had sealed off the entire area. Military personnel surrounded the excavation site. This wasn't just a scientific discovery anymore. This was something bigger, something that made everyone nervous. Linda took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment her boots touched the metal floor, something changed. The lights inside the ship flickered to life. Not gradually. All at once. Every corridor, every room, every surface suddenly glowed with a soft blue light. It was like the ship had been sleeping and someone had just woken it up. Linda's team stopped dead in their tracks. Nobody had expected this. The ship wasn't supposed to be powered. It had been buried in ice for thousands of years. "Recording everything," Linda said into her radio. Her voice sounded small inside her helmet. The corridors stretched ahead of them, perfectly preserved, impossibly clean. No dust. No decay. No signs that time had passed at all. The walls were smooth and metallic, with panels and controls that meant nothing to any of them. This technology was beyond anything humanity had ever created. The team moved deeper into the ship. Linda walked in front, her flashlight searching the shadows even though the blue lights were now bright enough to see by. The corridors felt purposeful, designed with intelligence and precision. Every angle made sense. Every corner had a function. This wasn't built by accident. This was built by beings who understood engineering and design at a level humans were only beginning to grasp. Then they found the first cryo chamber. It was a large rectangular pod made of the same crystalline material as the ship's hull. Inside, visible through a transparent section, was a body. Not human. The shape was vaguely similar, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but everything was different. The skin had a faint green tint. The features were sharper, more angular. The hands had too many fingers. Linda stepped back, her breath coming faster. This was real. This was actually real. "We've got bodies," she reported to command, her voice steady despite the fear running through her veins. "Multiple cryo chambers. Multiple beings. Definitely not human." There were dozens of chambers. The team moved through what looked like a storage section, passing one pod after another. Each one contained a being frozen in time. The faces behind the transparent sections were calm, peaceful, like they were simply sleeping. Like they might wake up tomorrow expecting everything to be normal. Linda wondered how long they'd been here. 1,000 years? 10,000? Longer? She pushed deeper into the ship, following the corridors toward the center. The technology became more complex. There were rooms filled with equipment that didn't look like anything earthly. Screens with information displayed in symbols that matched the markings on the ship's exterior. Controls and buttons and switches organized in patterns that suggested purpose and function. Then Linda found the data logs. It was in what looked like a central hub, a large circular room with a central console. The console was still active, still functioning after all this time. There were screens displaying information, and when Linda approached, the screens shifted. The symbols changed. It was like the ship was trying to communicate, trying to show her something important. The computer system was old, incredibly old, but it was responsive. Working with the team's translator device, they began piecing together fragments of information. What they discovered made Linda's blood run cold. The ship hadn't crashed here by accident. The logs showed deliberate choices. Someone had steered this vessel into the Arctic ice deliberately. The crew had chosen this location. The crew had chosen to hide. The logs spoke of a chase, of pursuit, of something hunting them across the stars. The entries became more desperate as they went backward in time. The beings on this ship, Linda could see that now, weren't explorers. They were refugees. They were running from something. Running and hiding and going into cryosleep, hoping that one day when it was safe they could wake up. And they had chosen Earth as their hiding place. Linda found entries showing preparations made before the sleep. The beings had left behind records, databases, information. As if they hoped someone might find them. Someone intelligent enough to understand. Someone who would need to know the truth about where they came from, why the ship was here, what danger the ship's creators had been fleeing from. The blue lights of the ship continued to glow softly around her. The cryo chambers held their sleeping passengers. And Linda Peterson stood in the center of an alien spacecraft, holding secrets that would change human history forever. She transmitted everything back to command, knowing that her life, and everyone's life, had just entered completely new territory. The ship had been waiting. And now, finally, someone had arrived. Dr. Thomas Wright stared at the translation on his computer screen. He had been working for 72 hours straight, barely sleeping, barely eating. The AI systems from the spacecraft had finally begun to make sense. The symbols were decoding. The message was becoming clear. And what Thomas was reading couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. A glitch in the translation software. A misunderstanding. He read it again. The words were the same. The meaning was unmistakable. Humans weren't native to Earth. They had been brought here. Deliberately placed on this planet by the beings in the spacecraft as a backup population. Insurance. A safety plan for a species that had been hunted across the galaxy by enemies so powerful and so relentless that they had to create multiple populations, scattered across different worlds, just to ensure their kind would survive. Thomas pushed away from his desk and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising over the city. People were going about their normal lives. Going to work, getting coffee, taking their kids to school. None of them knew. None of them had any idea what Thomas had just discovered. None of them understood that everything they believed about themselves, about where they came from, about their history and their origins, all of it was a lie. He picked up his phone to call the director. His hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. Within hours, the information had been verified by multiple teams of scientists. Within a day, it had reached the highest levels of government. Within 2 days it was everywhere. The news had leaked. Someone had talked to a journalist. And suddenly the entire world knew. The headlines were everywhere. Humans not native to Earth. Ancient aliens created mankind. We are not who we thought we were. News channels showed the same images over and over, the spacecraft, the cryochambers, the strange technology. News anchors struggled to explain what was happening. Their voices wavered. Some of them looked like they were on the verge of crying. How do you tell people that their entire understanding of human existence is wrong? In churches across the world, people gathered in confusion and fear. If humans were created by aliens, what did that mean for faith? What did that mean for God? Religious leaders gave statements that nobody understood. Some said it was a test of faith. Some said it proved God worked through mysterious means. Some refused to acknowledge it at all. But doubt had entered the conversation. Uncertainty had spread like a virus. Governments held emergency meetings. World leaders called each other frantically. Some wanted to keep the information hidden. Some wanted to broadcast it to the entire planet immediately. Some wanted to study it more, to understand it better before telling anyone. But it was too late for secrecy. The truth was already out. And people were losing their minds. In New York City, thousands gathered in Times Square holding signs and shouting. In London, Parliament was in chaos. In Tokyo, people filled the streets asking questions that nobody could answer. Why had we been created? What was the purpose? What did it mean for humanity's future? Were we just an experiment? Were we just a backup plan? Were we important, or were we just insurance? Riots broke out in major cities. People broke windows. Cars were overturned. Police in riot gear faced off against crowds of angry, confused, terrified citizens. It wasn't violence born from hatred. It was violence born from existential crisis. People didn't know who they were anymore. Their entire sense of identity had been shattered. Thomas watched it all on television from his lab. He saw the chaos spreading across the globe. He saw people crying. He saw families arguing. He saw protests and counter-protests. He saw religious groups holding vigils. He saw scientists being interviewed on every channel, trying to explain something that nobody really understood yet. A colleague came into his office around midnight. "People are calling for your head," she said quietly. "Religious groups are saying you're a fraud. Some are calling you a liar. Some are saying you made it all up." She paused. "Are you okay?" Thomas wasn't okay. He was far from okay. Because what he had discovered wasn't just scientific information. It was the answer to the oldest question humanity had ever asked. Where did we come from? And the answer had destroyed people's sense of purpose, their sense of belonging, their sense of meaning. But as Thomas thought about it more, he realized something. The hardest part wasn't understanding where humans came from. That was just facts. That was just history. The hard part was accepting what it meant. The hard part was accepting that humans were created for a reason. To survive, to persist, to carry on when their creators couldn't. The hard part was accepting that maybe, just maybe, humans were stronger than anyone had ever realized. Because despite the chaos, despite the riots, despite the collapse of certainty, humanity was still here. Humanity was still asking questions. Humanity was still trying to understand. And that, Thomas realized, might be exactly why they had been created in the first place. Dr. Victoria Chen had barely slept in 3 weeks. The laboratory was cold and sterile, filled with the hum of computers and genetic sequencing machines. She stood over her microscope, staring at human DNA for the 1000th time that month. But this time she was looking for something specific. Something hidden. Something that shouldn't be there. And she found it. Buried deep within human genetic code, layered beneath millions of years of evolution, were markers. Deliberate modifications. Instructions that had been placed there by the beings who created the ship. Victoria's hands trembled as she analyzed the data. These weren't random mutations. These weren't natural evolutionary changes. These were like a dormant program waiting to be activated. Waiting for someone to flip a switch. The activation sequence was written in the ancient logs they had translated from the spacecraft. It was surprisingly simple. A combination of genetic therapy, electromagnetic stimulation, and specially designed compounds that could be synthesized from Earth materials. Victoria had the formula. She had the technology. She had everything needed to wake up the hidden potential that had been sleeping inside human DNA for thousands of years. The question was whether she should do it. The government wanted her to. Military commanders wanted soldiers who could think faster, who could process information like computers, who could see in the dark and hear whispers from a mile away. Corporations wanted workers who could understand advanced engineering without years of training. Everyone wanted the power. Everyone wanted the advantage. But Victoria knew the risks. She had read the warnings in the logs. The beings who created humanity had left messages about what would happen if the activation sequence was used. There would be consequences. There always were. Still, volunteers came forward. People who wanted to transcend their limitations. People who wanted to become something more. The first volunteer was a young man named David. He was smart, fit, healthy. Perfect for the procedure. Victoria explained everything to him, made sure he understood the risks. He signed the consent forms and lay down on the medical bed. The activation took 6 hours. Victoria watched the monitors as David's DNA began to change. The dormant code started expressing itself. His neural pathways rewired. His sensory receptors enhanced. His cognitive processing accelerated. It should have been agony. It should have killed him. But David remained calm, almost peaceful, as his body transformed into something new. When it was over, David opened his eyes. They were different now. The pupils dilated wider. The irises seemed to hold more color, more depth. He sat up slowly and looked at Victoria. "I can see the individual photons in the light," he said quietly. "I can hear your heartbeat from across the room. I can understand the mathematics of quantum mechanics just by looking at the equations. I can think 1,000 times faster than I could before." Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. It had worked. The ancient program had activated perfectly. Humanity could be upgraded. The latent potential that had been sleeping inside them for millennia could be awakened. More volunteers came. Then more. Victoria trained a team of doctors to perform the activation procedure. Within days, there were dozens of activated humans. Within weeks, there were hundreds. Each one emerged from the procedure changed. Enhanced. More than human. They could learn languages in hours. They could memorize entire books by reading them once. They could solve engineering problems that would take normal humans years to figure out. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. But then the warning came. Victoria was reviewing the ancient logs again when she found it. A timestamp. A message. A desperate note left by the beings who had created this activation sequence thousands of years ago. The message was simple and chilling. Do not activate the humans unless the hunters return. Once activation begins, the signal broadcasts across space. The hunters will know. The hunters will come. Victoria's blood went cold. She immediately pulled up the transmission logs from the spacecraft. The ancient ship had been broadcasting a signal ever since they had turned on its systems. A signal that said quite clearly, "We are here. We are awake. Come find us." She ran to the command center where military officials were monitoring all communications. "We need to stop the activation process," she said urgently. "We need to stop it now." The general in charge looked at her like she was crazy. "Stop it? We've just created the most advanced soldiers in human history. We're about to create an entire army of enhanced soldiers. We're not stopping anything." Victoria grabbed his arm. "The hunters are coming." The ship's logs said. "I don't care what the logs said," the general interrupted. "We have power now. Real power. For the first time in human history, we can compete with whoever is out there." The activation continues. 3 days later, the deep space detection systems picked up something. A signal. Multiple signals. Ships. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. They were coming from the edge of the solar system, moving at impossible speeds, heading directly toward Earth. The hunters had found them. Victoria stood in the observation room watching the data streams. The activated humans were being mobilized. Weapons were being prepared. Governments were uniting. Humanity was no longer helpless. But humanity was also no longer hidden. The world had changed in an instant. Everything they had feared had come true. The awakening had begun. And with it, the countdown to the greatest test humanity would ever face had started. Commander Christopher Mitchell stood on the observation deck of the Orbital Defense Station, watching the screens. The Hunter fleet was visible now, not just as data points but as actual ships appearing against the black of space. Thousands of them. Maybe tens of thousands. They filled the screens with their presence, ancient vessels bristling with weapons that looked like they could destroy planets. This was it. This was the moment everything would be decided. Behind Christopher, the Earth hung in space, beautiful, fragile, home to 8 billion people who were watching the same screens, holding their breath, waiting to see if they would survive the next few hours. In government buildings across the globe, leaders were gathered in bunkers. In homes and streets and public squares, people were praying, crying, holding each other. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone understood that this was not a negotiation. This was war. But something had changed since the hunters had started their approach. Something fundamental had shifted in how humanity saw itself. The activated humans were different. Christopher had worked with them for weeks now, and he still couldn't quite believe what they could do. They could process tactical information at speeds that made normal human thinking look like slow motion. They could see patterns in chaos. They could make intuitive leaps of logic that took normal people hours to work through. And more importantly, they had united humanity. For the first time in recorded history, every nation on Earth was working together. Not competing. Not fighting over resources or ideology. Working together toward a single purpose: survival. The ancient AI from the spacecraft had been crucial in this unity. It had shared technology. It had shared knowledge. It had shown humanity that they were capable of so much more than they had ever realized. Defense systems that humanity had been decades away from developing were now operational. Weapons that could hurt these ancient hunters were being prepared. For the first time, humanity wasn't helpless. "They're sending a transmission," one of the communication officers said. Christopher moved to the communication console. The message was clear and brutal. It was in a language that shouldn't have been understandable, but the ancient AI translated it instantly. "Surrender your world. Surrender your technology. Surrender your enhanced population. Do this and some of you will be allowed to live. Refuse and we will erase your species from existence." It was an ultimatum. Kill or be killed. No middle ground. No negotiation. Christopher looked around at his team. Activated humans and normal humans working side by side. They all looked back at him, waiting to see what Commander Christopher Mitchell would say. Waiting to see if humanity would choose slavery or death. "Send our response," Christopher said quietly. The communication officer hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? We're vastly outnumbered. Even with our enhanced soldiers and the alien technology, they have more ships, more weapons, more experience." "Send it," Christopher repeated. The message went out across the void of space, simple and defiant. "We will not surrender. We will fight. And we will win." The hunters didn't respond with words. They responded with action. The fleet moved forward, weapons charging. Space lit up with weapons fire, beams of energy and projectiles traveling at impossible speeds. But humanity was ready. The defense systems activated. Shields that had been offline for millennia suddenly blazed to life, powered by the ancient spacecraft. Missiles launched. Weapons fired. The activated humans coordinated the defense with perfect precision, their enhanced minds seeing threats and opportunities faster than any computer. The battle was chaotic and terrible and beautiful all at once. Ships exploded. Energy weapons tore through the darkness. Humanity fought with a desperation that no enemy had expected. These weren't soldiers trained in surrender. These weren't people who accepted defeat. These were beings fighting for their homes, their families, their right to exist. And they were winning. The hunters had expected easy victory against a primitive species. They had expected terrified resistance that would crumble quickly. What they found instead was a species that had discovered its own potential. Humanity was fighting with tactics that were brilliant and unpredictable. The activated humans were using the ancient technology in ways the AI itself hadn't anticipated. They were adapting, learning, evolving in real time. Ship after hunter ship was destroyed. The odds were still against humanity, but the gap was closing. The hunters realized too late that they had made a mistake. They had waited too long to come. They had given humanity just enough time to prepare. They had underestimated a species they thought was primitive. As the battle raged, Christopher saw something shift on the screens. The hunter fleet was retreating. Not all of it, but enough. The most advanced ships, the command vessels, were turning away. The hunters were leaving. Humanity had won. On Earth below, people erupted into celebrations. In the streets, in homes, in government buildings, people who had been strangers hours before were embracing, crying, laughing, alive. The species had faced extinction and had chosen to fight. The species had united. The species had survived. But more than that, something deeper had changed. Humanity was no longer confined to one planet. Humanity was no longer a refugee species hiding in darkness. Humanity had proven itself capable of standing among the stars. They had proven they could fight. They could adapt. They could overcome impossible odds. Christopher stood on the observation deck, watching the distant stars, watching the last of the Hunter fleet disappear into the darkness. Earth hung below, beautiful and home. But also a beginning. A launching point for a species that was finally ready to claim its place in the universe. Humanity had awakened. Humanity had fought. Humanity had won. And the universe would never be the same. The choice had been made. And humanity had chosen to survive.